Now, welcome to the lecture about forensic entomology. This is part of our series of Entomology 101, where I teach you about different fields of entomology. Today, as said, forensic entomology. As quick little forward, this is not a full class of university or college or anything. This is just to educate the general public. It's mostly general information. I am not a professional teacher and I'm also not all-knowing. So I do not know everything, I simply did research for this. Also a small trigger warning because there's mention of violence, crime, murder, and gore. There is also a picture of some dead pig to show you the different stages. If you're uncomfortable with that, or if it does trigger you, please, viewer discretion is closed. Now, what is entomology? We learned that already. But it is the study of insects. It sometimes extends to other small critters, but it is not etymology, because etymology is the study of the origin of words and the way in which their meanings have changed throughout history. The other small critters that it might to extend to would be spiders and myriapods like centipedes and millipedes. Now, what is forensic entomology? It's the entomology which helps solve crimes. So if somebody gets murdered, if there's domestic violence, if something had, I don't know, termite damage, who was liable, if someone got a disease from an insect, something that could be court viable, someone who could be court liable for this. And we will get into more of these crimes. There are three main parts about it, which would be medio-collegial, urban, and stored product pests. The definition of forensic is relating to or denoting the application of scientific methods and techniques to investigation of crime. Now, one of the most important parts about forensic entomology is the post-mortem interval estimation, the PMI. You will hear that a lot throughout this lectures, so let's get over it, what it actually means. It is just the time that has passed since death. It very much depends on the insect activity on corpses, which is why forensic entomology even exists in the first place. For the insect's life stages on or near a body, experts can determine how long it has been since death. The different life stages of insects on the body, meaning like larva, pupa, eggs, adults, whichever you find can help tell us what time they died. Because through a lot of studies, we have figured out when different insects come to the body. The pace of insect colonization and development is influenced by temperature, humidity, and other living things nearby. So some insects prefer going there when it's warm, when it's high humidity, and when they're alone, or if they got brought there by other different insects, or animals. Some insects do arrive on different insects in this. We will hear about that later. Now, let's hear some stories from an actual forensic entomologist, which worked on some cases.
See this fly? It's a florid fly, also known as a coffin fly. Flies like these provide crucial evidence in solving mysterious deaths.
Insects never lie. Insects are tiny witnesses. With my job as forensic entomologist, I use these tiny witnesses to give justice to victims.
Wired spoke with Dr. Paula Magni to understand how insects can be used to help solve suspicious deaths.
The forensic entomologist is one of the many experts that work at the crime scene in order to provide more information to the course of an investigation. The post-mortem interval, or PMI, is considered the time since death. It is pretty much the time between the moment of death to the identification of a dead body. They can provide an alibi to somebody or destroy an alibi for somebody else.
Turin, Italy. Case 1.
The victim was a female that was found wrapped in a blanket and covered by a carpet. The pathologist could not estimate a time since death. The body was highly decomposed. Typically, the pathologist worked within the 72 hours after death. After this time, nature takes over, and the typical signs of death, the rigor mortis, algol mortis, livor mortis, cannot be used anymore. But this is exactly the perfect time for the insects to colonize the body and start what we call the biological clock. That is what forensic entomologists use to investigate and estimate the time since death.
Estimating the PMI in this case relied on analyzing the life cycle of flies. Their development from egg to adult can be predicted based on environmental conditions.
Insects grow faster or slower based on the environmental temperature, and there were maggot masses active on the body. So if outside there were 25 degrees, inside of the maggot mass nearly 28 degrees. My job in that case was to collect the maggots, considering the species and temperature, to backtrack the time since death. That case was very complex. There was already somebody suspected of this murder, but the insects were giving different information, giving an alibi to this suspect. The time since death was around the same time of a long exchange of messages and phone call with a certain person, helped the investigators investigate specifically on someone else, ask the right questions, and close the case.
Turn Italy, Case 2.
Some insects are interested in the fresh decomposition, some highly decayed, and some when body is just bones. Based on the kind of insect I can find, I can understand from how long the body is there. So my job was to participate into the investigation if this person was dead since the last time he was seen alive, or if there was something going on. The body was nearly mummified by the bugs, and specifically one type of bugs that are called the larder beetles created a very strange structure that were looking like threads on the body. When the body is mummified, or when I find just bones on a very old body, I use another technique that is called the successional waves methodology.
Successional waves refers to the different types of insects that are found at different stages of decomposition. Using this method allows forensic entomologists to estimate PMI for older cases.
The case of the forgotten man was pretty complex because there was an association of different type of insects. We had to identify which insects were belonging to the body and which one to the house. All of these insects were giving us information about how many successional waves had passed by to estimate the time since death. We realized that the body was laying in the place where we found it for at least a year and a half.
Western Australia, Case 3.
When we watch CSI or similar TV programs, most of the time investigators found the presence of a body on the ground. Reality is that the majority of the cases, bodies are found contained in something. We consider that as limited access environment. Insects have a physical impediment to reach the body, but they don't give up. Insects really try their best to reach the body because the body means food and the body means place for the offsprings to grow and survive. Blowflies will lay eggs on the zip, and the female of coffin flies can pass through the zip and reach the body. So there is this consuming food chain that happens inside of a suitcase that is very interesting because what we find inside is whatever happened before. So we can find different successions and we can work on that to identify from how long the body is inside of a suitcase. Despite these cases happen all around the world and pretty often, the research is really scant because it's very difficult to perform such a huge research. My group of research is developing this to find out how insects can interact with a body during the winter period in suitcases compared to trash can. This research will allow us to give more information to investigators if cases like this happen in Western Australia. Forensic entomology is really holistic from the point of view as a discipline because it considers insects, also had to consider the investigative process and has to combine the information from the insects with the information about the environment, the meteorology, and at the specific crime scene. What I'm trying to do with my work is to use this little piece of nature to give justice to the victim.
Now, we heard from an actual forensic entomologist about different cases, which was super interesting. I personally think that it is super interesting, and it also shows how CSI or any of those shows might get something wrong. Now, let's get to our next actual explanation, where we go over one of the three different kinds of forensic entomology. This is medical legal. It is the study of arthropods at various incidents, which is mostly like murder, suicide, or physical abuse. This is where this gets handy. This is where medical legal specialists get called into it. They can learn a lot of different details depending on the like the time since death, presence of toxics in body, like medications, and the movement of the body after death. Because if they move to a different location, different bugs might show up. The entomologists analyze which insects appear where on the body, and preserving well-studied species can give away a lot. So, if you have a really well-studied species that they know when arrives, what do they want from the body, they can get the post-mortem interval usually a lot faster and a lot easier. And this helps everyone solve the case. These are special investigations. And in terms of physical abuse, sometimes in wounds, insects can be found. And how those wounds were made can also be told, depending on how deep or when that was. Now, let's get to the urban one, which has both criminal and civil components. It focuses on urban pests and concerns pest infestations in buildings, gardens, and other urban environments. It can be the basis of litigation between private parties and landlords or exterminators. This is a lot of different things. Sometimes it helps in normal crime cases like murder, suicide, or any kind of death. But it can also help if there was an accident through termite damage, or it shows how effective an exterminator really was. Was the landlord just too cheap for anything? Anything that could be a basis in court. That is what litigation means. It's the basis of something used in court. And it can also track the transmission of disease carried by insects. Now, stored product is kind of exactly what it sounds like. If you'd like to read the definition, I can also read it out loud for you. It is the stored product forensic entomology and is often used in litigation over insect infestation or contamination of commercially distributed foods, including grains, flour, and packaged meals. There's not much more to it. The entomologists really just check who is liable that there were insects in those stored products, if it was from the distributor or if they just got into it after the house. And yeah, nobody really wants insects in their food unless you're getting like meal crickets or something. But they can also carry disease, which is not great if it gets into your food. Now, what insects are forensically important? There are a bunch of them. Let's get through them. I think the biggest group is flies, where you have blowflies, which are usually first to come in contact with corpses because they can smell death over 16 kilometers. Which means if somebody dies, blowflies are the first to know, blowflies are the first to arrive at the dead body and are the first to lay their eggs there. They also feed on the body, and so do their larvae. There's also flesh flies, which breed in carcasses, and some lay eggs in open mammal wounds. Humans are mammals, which means they can lay eggs in your wounds. If somebody is, somebody is not paying attention to their child, to the wound, don't get proper treatment, flesh flies might lay eggs in that. And that would be technically child abuse, so they would have a case. Houseflies are your most common type of fly ever, and they can very easily carry disease since they feed on very different things. They can feed on like poop. They can also feed on bodies. They can feed on a lot of different things and can carry a lot of different diseases. cheese flies. Yes, that is their name. They're used to estimate the time of death because they only reside in a body after 3 to 6 months after somebody has passed away. They come very late to the party, and through that they can tell if that body has been there for a long time or not. Coffin flies, well, they can bury into things almost 50 centimeters deep. So if the body was buried or is still buried somewhere, coffin flies might lead you to those. But there are a lot of fly species which can help, so I'm not going to go through all of them. Now, Ixyman has a question. Okay, does forensic entomology include non-insect arthropods? They actually do. Generally speaking, entomology can sometimes stretch to arachnids and myriapods, and so does forensic entomology. We will get to non-insects that are forensically important in a second, actually. But first off, we get to the beetles, not the band, but some very awesome insects, which can also help in these cases. First off, we have some rove beetles, which are very common predators of carrions. Carrions are corpses, carcasses, whatever you would want to call them, and they are very visible because they're quite large. So if it can help to spot them, to spot corpses if you haven't seen them, because they're loud and they're quite big, and they're also easy to spot on a dead body in pictures, for example. Hister beetles only become active at night when they enter the maggot-infested part of the corpse to capture and devour their maggot prey. These actually eat the maggots of flies in the body already. So they usually arrive after the flies have arrived and then just eat those. We also have carrion beetles, which are quite literally called after the carcasses, and are often used to determine time of death through various methods. Skin beetles. They are the only beetles with the enzymes to break down keratin, which is hair. So they usually arrive when not much is left of the body and consume and break down the hair. Now, here are our non-insect arthropods which help, which are mites. They feed on corpses and they feed on fly eggs. So if too many mites feed on fly eggs, it can actually lead to incorrect PMI estimates. Because if you want to use the fly larvae and maggots which are on the dead body for your PMI, and mites eat too many of them, you might get false information. Clothes moths, probably the most hated species of moths, and they feed on mammal hair, including animal hair, while in their larval stage. Now, insect succession is something we heard in the video and talks about the different stages of which insects arrive. I will give you another warning about this. There are pictures of a dead pig here which show you the stages, so view at your own discretion. The first stage has the arrival of necrophagous insects, such as blowflies, flesh flies, and insects lay eggs on the body or near the body in this stage. These hatched maggots afterwards then eat the decaying tissues of the okay, hold on. The maggots that hatched then eat the decaying tissues of the animal or the carcass, which is now what breaks down the dead body, so that it looks later very differently. Now, in the bloat stage, the body starts swelling up due to gas, and some insects are attracted to these gas and pheromones. Cheese flies and coffin flies usually arrive in this time and also start eating and start being predators to other insects on this. Now, in the decaying stage, the predatory insects increase by a lot. And the numbers of dermestid and rove beetles increases a lot as well. We have heard of why they do this and what they do, so it just makes sense that they arrive in this stage and completely break down the body until we have the dry stage, where the body is fully dried up. Some scavenger insects become visible on the body, such as ham beetles and skin beetles. This is very much the last stage. You usually just see bones, sometimes hair. That's why ham and skin beetles are what you see here. My homies love the dry stage. That is when you find the cool bones of the bodies. So yeah, it's kind of cool. And it is the last stage of a body and of our lecture for the day. I have been your host and lecturer, Entomology, and I hope you enjoyed. If there aren't any questions,